The light of creation still lingered over the earth, a veil of pristine perfection enveloping the entire world. The earth remained untouched, unblemished by pain, war, or destruction. Humanity walked with God in perfect harmony, dwelling in a world of unparalleled beauty, serenity, and purity. Yet, in the shadows, a subtle shift began to occur. The seemingly eternal balance teetered on the brink of collapse. The garden, where it all commenced, was an unrivaled paradise. Majestic mountains pierced the sky, the seas danced in rhythm with the wind, and the deep blue sky mirrored the glory of the Creator. The animals lived in harmony, seemingly sharing the same soul as the earth. Adam, his gaze fixed on the wonders of creation, felt completely at home. Eve, by his side, smiled at the world, an integral part of him, as the animals approached in complete trust. Paradise was a place where time appeared to stand still, where the morning light never dimmed. Adam looked at Eve, a serene smile gracing his lips. Yeah, all of this was given to us. We weren't just created, we were loved. Her eyes welled up with tears, but not of sadness. They were tears of wonder, reflecting the beauty of the world God had crafted for them. He knew that creation was more than just a gift, it was a reflection of God's boundless love. And for a moment, everything seemed perfect, untouched by doubt or fear. However, deep within Eden, a seed of discord was sown. A soft, almost imperceptible whisper crept into Eve's heart. The serpent materialized, gliding through the trees, its beauty captivating, its voice as smooth as the wind, hissing doubt. Did God really say? A malicious suggestion that spread like wildfire, igniting in the woman's heart. Doubt, a foreign entity, took root where once only complete trust had flourished. The choice was presented to them, and by choosing to disobey the divine command, the fall began. Suddenly, the world transformed. Eden, that perfect sanctuary, became a distant memory. The man and woman were banished from the garden, and a flaming sword guarded the entrance, symbolizing the separation between earth and heaven. Alone, cut off from God's presence, they were now acutely aware of their vulnerability and the profound sin they had introduced into the world. Paradise was lost forever, along with the innocence of Adam and Eve. When Eve gave birth to Cain, her eyes reflected pain, and a profound sadness filled her heart. The birth of a child should have been a celebration, but now the joy was muted, tinged with the knowledge that the world would never be the same. Sin had already contaminated their lineage, and generations to come would bear the weight of that fateful choice. Cain grew to be proud, aloof, and increasingly alienated from God's goodness. Abel, in stark contrast, was humble and devout, dedicating his life to the Lord. With respect and reverence, he offered the Creator the best of his flock. I will offer the best of my sheep. He understood that honoring God required giving the best of oneself. Cain, however, watched in silence, filled with resentment. He offered God the leftover scraps of his harvest without care or love. He chose the finest fruits for himself, leaving the inferior ones for God. In presenting his offering, Cain felt he was merely fulfilling an obligation, not engaging in an act of worship. God was pleased with Abel's offering, but rejected Cain's. The difference was clear. Abel offered from the heart, with genuine faith, while Cain simply gave what he didn't want. Sin was now deeply ingrained in his heart. When Cain realized his offering was rejected, anger consumed him. Jealousy, pride, and bitterness converged. He glared at his brother with hatred. The field became the scene of his wrath. Cain, consumed with rage, approached Abel. Wordless and unrepentant, he raised his hand against his brother. The field, once a symbol of growth and life, became the tomb of the righteous. Cain killed Abel, and the blood of his righteous brother cried out from the earth, echoing in God's ears. The silence that followed was deep and heavy, as if creation itself had paused to mourn the loss. God looked upon the scene, and for a moment, his presence seemed veiled. Cain, now marked by guilt, fled. He left behind his mother's grief, the pain in his father's eyes, and embarked on a life of wandering, traversing a world now intimately acquainted with the burden of sin. Life continued, but it was irrevocably changed. Evil had spread, and Abel's blood cried out for justice. Seth, Adam and Eve's other son, was born. His lineage, though marked by pain and the fall, still sought God. But sin had become deeply embedded in the following generations, and humanity drifted toward an uncertain future, ever further from the original purity of creation. Human knowledge expanded. The first cities emerged on the fertile plains. Tribes grew into great nations, and humanity began to dominate the earth. They tamed animals, shaped metals, and created music and art. Yet, despite all this progress, corruption continued to spread like a shadow over every aspect of life. People began to name the winds, carve idols, and build altars and temples. But the true relationship with God had been lost, and offerings were now made heartlessly, like Cain's. Evil flourished, and the seeds of sin were deeply planted in humanity. Tribes and cities continued to expand, but what had begun in Eden now seemed like a distant legend, a story men had forgotten. Sin, which began with a single choice, spread throughout the world, contaminating everything humanity touched. Few still called upon the name of the Lord. In a world increasingly distant from the goodness and purity of old, hearts grew callous. Among those who still remembered God, one man stood out. Lamech, a descendant of Cain, a man of sharp words and violent actions, proclaimed his strength and vengeance as a badge of honor. "I have killed a man for wounding me. If Cain's mark demands vengeance sevenfold, then mine shall be 77-fold. He became a symbol of pride and destruction, a harbinger of endless retaliation. Revenge seemed to be his only creed, and he infected those around him with it. The era was marked by pioneering spirit, but also by human ego. Increasingly alienated from his true nature, man began to see force as the only language capable of defining the world. Yet, even in this world of violence and pride, other names emerged. Jabal, the father of those who lived in tents and raised livestock, understood nomadic life, but also the dependence on the land and the heavens. Jubal, the master of melodies, crafted bone flutes and harps with strings made from the plants that grew around his village. Tubal-Cain, the blacksmith, mastered metal and the art of war, forging spears and swords, a testament to the rise and fall of humanity. Art and destruction were born together in a paradox where the beauty of creation was inextricably intertwined with the devastating force that humanity now sought. As cities grew, men began to form kingdoms. Leaders became kings, and palaces of rough stone rose in the valleys, dominating the landscape as monuments to human vanity. Festivals and sacrifices permeated daily life. Altars were erected not to God, but to idols of power, wealth, and glory. People, once humble and devoted, now indulged in a vicious cycle of ego worship. The search for the divine was replaced by the relentless pursuit of self-aggrandizement. From above, the Lord observed this transformation. The distance between man and God widened. The Lord saw how faith was giving way to power and how men's hearts became increasingly insensitive to truth. The pursuit of spiritual understanding was being eclipsed by arrogance and the will to dominate. The connection with the Creator was disintegrating. But still, a spark of hope remained. In the days of Enoch, something began to shift. People, weary of their own decay, began to call upon the name of the Lord once more. This moment, though small compared to the vast abyss of corruption, brought a breath of hope. In the hearts of the righteous, a flame of faith still flickered, though dimly, like embers in the darkness. Mankind was lost, but there were still those who sought him, still those who remembered the Creator. Creation, however, was no longer the same. The trees seemed less vibrant, the skies less clear. The animals became more cautious, more distant, as if aware of the corruption that was consuming the world. The earth, restless, seemed to reflect the pain of the sin that humanity had sown. Everything had changed, and the echo of human choice still reverberated in every living being, in every stone, in every river. And then the whispers began to grow louder. Ancient tales began to circulate among men. Stories of celestial beings who had descended to earth, the Watchers. Their presence inspired a mixture of awe and fear. Men called them gods, while women saw them as saviors. These beings, sent to observe humanity, were beginning to overstep the boundaries of their divine mission. "Behold, how beautiful are the daughters of men," they murmured among themselves, now seduced by beauty and carnal desire. In a sacred place high atop Mount Hermon, 200 of them made a pact. They swore to descend to earth and never return until they had taken human wives. It was the dawn of an age of corruption that would forever transform the world. When they descended, their arrival was glorious. Men perceived them as gods. Their garments shone like starlight. Their voices echoed like soft thunder. Their eyes pierced the human soul with indescribable power. Women desired them, while men feared them. They were no ordinary beings, and their presence resonated deeply in the hearts of all. Human women, captivated by their supernatural beauty, surrendered themselves to them. And the offspring of these unions were no ordinary children. They grew to an immense stature, possessed unparalleled strength, and exhibited an arrogance that surpassed anything known to men. They were the Nephilim, the giants, the first renowned heroes. With their power, they began to dominate mankind, subjugating the creatures of the earth, and soon became the first tyrants known and feared throughout the world. Cities began to erect statues in their honor. Their names were whispered with reverence, but also with dread. Yet, something was deeply amiss. They did not age like humans. Their hunger was insatiable, and they soon turned against everything and everyone. First, they began to desecrate tombs, searching for sustenance. When there was nothing left to consume, they turned against humanity itself. The fertile plains, once places of abundance, became camps of slavery. The Nephilim demanded tributes of blood, and fearful humanity submitted. Those who had descended from heaven were now corrupted, claiming the earth as their domain. Knowledge bestowed by those who were supposed to be observers was now used as a means of control. Witchcraft, astrology, enchantments, genetic manipulation, hallucinogenic herbs, and weapons of war spread like a cancer among mankind. The sky began to darken. Azazel, one of the leaders of the Watchers, taught men to forge swords, shields, and armor. He also instructed women in seduction and the use of makeup to gain power, teaching them to summon the elements of the earth. Knowledge was transformed into power, and power was used for control. War became an art, and lust a religion. The blood of men flowed over the stones like wine, nourishing the gods and their followers. The world was sinking into an abyss of destruction. Amidst this decay, a new race of creatures was born. The hybrids, abominations, monsters spawned from the union between the children of the Watchers and human women. Beast-like beings with immense strength, grotesque appearances, eyes that radiated rage, iron skin, and voices that could drive men mad. These distorted and monstrous creatures belonged to no natural order. Creation was being violated, and the wounds inflicted by the fall were widening. The world was collapsing, and humanity, with its blind eyes, failed to perceive the depths of the abyss into which it was plunging. The choices made in the days of Adam and Eve had reverberated for generations, and now the consequences were more evident than ever. Man, who had been created in the image and likeness of God, was becoming a mere shadow of his former self. The human heart had turned away from the light. Faith had become legend, and the Creator's name was remembered only in hushed whispers. Pride had replaced obedience, and wisdom was replaced by corrupting curiosity. Man yearned for power, for control, for eternity. And it was in his consuming desire that he encountered the Watchers. They descended from on high, cloaked in splendor. Their faces shone like fire, and their eyes reflected the brilliance of the stars. They arrived in a guise of glory, and the world bowed before them. They brought with them knowledge that man should never have possessed, the secrets of metals, the crafting of blades, the use of precious stones, the power of herbs, the design of the constellations, and the paths of the wind. Men called them masters and later gods. They built altars in their honor, erected towers and temples that pierced the clouds, and offered sacrifices to them. Women adorned their bodies with gold and rare perfumes, seeking the favor of the celestial beings, and the Watchers, overcome by vanity, accepted the worship. What began as instruction evolved into worship. What was once wisdom transformed into idolatry. Each Watcher claimed a domain and a legion of followers. Azazel, the warrior, taught how to forge weapons and armor, and iron came to dominate the earth. Semjaza, the mighty, revealed the secrets of words and the hidden arts. Barakil showed men the path of the stars and women the power of enchantments. Kokabil, the luminous one, taught how to read the stars and control the weather. And many others, each with their own heresy, shaped humanity in their image. Thus, the Watchers became kings over the nations. Their voices were heard in assemblies, their names were engraved on stones, their images carved in gold and ivory. The people called them sons of heaven, and the true God was forgotten. Men raised their eyes not to the Creator, but to the mountains where the Watchers dwelled. There, lightning was seen as signs of their wrath, and the wind as the whisper of their presence. And from them were born the giants, the sons of corruption, beings who combined the strength of angels with the flesh of men. They were monsters of power and fury, of immense size and deformed souls. They possessed voices that made the hills tremble and eyes that burned like fire. They devoured the fruit of the earth, the livestock, and even men themselves. When there was nothing left to consume, they turned on each other, and the blood of the giants stained the ground. But even in their destruction, they were worshipped. Nations erected colossi in their image, statues with iron wings and stone faces. People offered their sons and daughters in sacrifice, and around their temples, crowds danced and sang hymns in languages heaven had forgotten. Violence became law. Justice was buried. Love and compassion vanished. Power was the new faith, and strength was the new god. Kings sought counsel from the watchers. Priests served idols, and magicians summoned spirits that brought confusion and destruction. The world had become a furnace of sin, and the breath of life began to rot. The watchers ruled over the people with an iron fist and false promises of glory. They controlled the seasons, manipulated the weather, and guided the minds of men like a blind flock. And men served them with devotion, believing that these false gods could grant them immortality. They built entire cities dedicated to them, temples upon the seas, palaces carved into the mountains, altars covered in blood and incense. The prayers that once rose to the Creator now faded into smoke before the thrones of the watchers. The heavens themselves were veiled in shame. The stars seemed to dim in lamentation. The faithful angels watched in silence, and the earth trembled under the weight of the abomination. The heart of man corrupted and hardened, no longer seeking redemption. Evil had become nature, and goodness a rare vestige. Generations were born in darkness and died in idolatry. The righteous were persecuted, the innocent sacrificed, and the powerful became drunk on the blood of the weak. And yet, amidst the dust and despair, there was still a remnant. Few, almost forgotten, kept the memory of the Creator alive. They were broken-hearted men who walked in the shadow of giants and still whispered ancient prayers. Their eyes turned to heaven, and their voices cried out for justice, and the Creator heard. From the heavens, He gazed upon the work of His hands and saw that the earth was consumed by corruption. Nothing remained pure, neither thought, nor heart, nor blood. The watchers had defiled creation, and man had become a slave to his own perdition. Then the silence of heaven was shattered. The winds began to stir, and the waters of the deep began to churn. The time of patience was drawing to a close. The Most High arose from His throne, and the faithful angels awaited His word. For when false gods reign on earth, the true God prepares judgment. And when the heavens open, nothing can remain hidden. The roar of justice drew near, and the whole earth trembled, awaiting the voice that had once created the world, the same voice that would now come to purify it. And the heavens watched in silence. But not all were silent. A man walked with God. His name was Enoch, a descendant of Seth. He refused to accept the path of the earth. His eyes saw beyond the veil. His dreams were prophetic. In a vision, he saw the throne of God and heard, "Go and proclaim the judgment that is to come." Enoch stood before the crowds and shouted, "The Most High sees. Nothing is hidden. The watchers will be judged. The giants will fall." But they mocked him. They laughed at his words and tried to silence him. Enoch, however, was unafraid. He wrote everything on stone and on parchment paper. His records spoke of portals, celestial spheres, angelic hosts, and the day of the great judgment. And then, one day, Enoch vanished. He was no longer seen among men. They said God had taken him for Himself, snatched him away before evil consumed all. And his absence was felt like the extinguishing of the last flame in the night. Unfettered and unrestrained, the watchers continued their work. The forests began to wither. The ground trembled. The stars seemed less bright. The rivers changed course. Nature groaned under the weight of corruption. The sky, once blue, had grown heavy and gray, and the winds carried ominous portents. The cry of the earth reached the heavens, and the Most High summoned His holy angels. What has been done cannot continue. The watchers will be chained, their children extinguished, the earth purified. The archangel Uriel was sent to Enoch, already in the heavens, to record the sentence of the fallen angels. Michael, Raphael, and Gabriel prepared for the execution of the judgment. But on earth, corruption still spread like an invisible plague. Men built towers that tore through the clouds, attempting to touch the heavens. They claimed they wanted to reach the gods, but their hearts longed only to be like them. Women offered their children in rituals to the Nephilim, believing that the blood of the innocent would bring power and protection. Blood cried out from the earth, and its sound was like thunder in the ears of God. The watchers taught men the art of mastering the elements. They controlled fire and wind, shaped the weather, and altered the seasons. But every spell cast, every secret revealed, further eroded the balance of creation. The world burned with magic, cruelty, and darkness. The seas became impure, crops rotted before harvest, and the skies were choked with smoke. The nights were no longer silent. On the winds, distant screams could be heard, the wails of lost souls and the echoes of heavenly voices. The ground cracked as if the earth itself wished to expel the evil that contaminated it. In the heavens, lightning danced without thunder, signs of a power gathering beyond the clouds. It was as if all of creation knew something was coming. The birds fled westward. The beasts abandoned their dens, and the very air seemed denser, as if breathing judgment. Even the giants, in their arrogance, looked to the heavens and feared what they did not understand. The angels watched, prepared for the final command. And the Most High spoke, "The time of cleansing has come. The earth will be washed clean, and the blood of the innocent will be avenged. The watchers who corrupted the flesh will be cast into the depths. The giants will perish beneath the waves, and a new covenant will rise from the waters." The decree echoed through the cosmos. The stars trembled, and the sea responded with fury. The clouds began to gather over the mountains like a heavenly army. And amid thunder and lightning, the name of the Lord was heard again. For the promised judgment had been written before the foundation of the world. And now the time had come, the time when God would wash the earth with tears of heaven and the fire of justice. When the light of creation had become but a distant memory, the world was awash in corruption. But amid the chaos, one lineage still endured, the descendants of Seth. Though weakened, they preserved the memory of the Creator. They hoped, prayed, and taught their children that all was not lost. They spoke of a God who still saw, still heard, still cared. Among them was a calm, just, and hardworking man. While others lost themselves in violence and depravity, he walked among the trees and listened to the voice of the wind. His name was Noah. Noah worked the land with calloused hands and a serene gaze. Men mocked him, calling him outdated, a dreamer trapped in ancient myths. But Noah guarded a secret that did not originate from men. He heard the voice of God. Walking through the fields, he felt the presence of the Almighty like a gentle breeze through the leaves. He perceived the sacred in the small things, in the rhythm of the river, in the birdsong, in a silence between thunderclaps. While the world spiraled into madness, Noah cultivated faith. His sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, learned from him to fear the Lord, even while living among a corrupt and cruel generation. While the people worshipped false gods and the Nephilim reigned as tyrants, Noah and his household remained faithful, sustained by something the world had forgotten. Then, on a night unlike any other, the heavens opened. The darkness shimmered in hues humanity had never witnessed. Lights danced like rivers of fire among the stars. A presence descended upon Noah, powerful and serene, and a voice, like thunder mingled with wind, spoke to his spirit. "The end of all flesh has come before me, for the earth is filled with violence. Make yourself an ark of cypress wood. Lord, how will this be? I will give you the measurements, and I will establish my covenant with you." The next morning, Noah gathered his family together. His voice was firm, his eyes unwavering. "God has spoken to me. Judgment will come in the form of a great flood. We must build an ark." His sons looked at him silent. The wind seemed to whisper agreement as it blew between them. Shem was the first to speak, saying, "If the Lord has spoken, we will obey." And so the massive project began. Timber was felled, and logs were shaped with painstaking care. The sound of axes echoed through valleys that had never known rain. The villagers, seeing what they were doing, would laugh as they passed by. "Look at the madman," they'd shout. "Who built a ship where there's no sea?" But Noah didn't respond to their taunts. Sweat poured down his face as he placed beam upon beam, his movements precise and deliberate. Every hammer blow was a prayer, a plea for salvation. Every stake driven into the ground was a declaration of his unwavering faith. Meanwhile, in the cities, the Nephilim ruled with an iron fist. Men were forced into brutal gladiatorial combat for the twisted entertainment of the giants. Children were sacrificed in horrific rituals. Women were forced into servitude, becoming playthings of the gods and giants. The once grand palaces of the Watchers, now grotesquely deformed by their own corruption, had become temples of fire and blood. The human kings, mere puppets of the fallen angels, ruled with unimaginable cruelty, and the earth became a reflection of hell itself. But the heavens were not silent, nor did they remain idle. The faithful angel stirred, moved by divine purpose. The Most High ascended his throne in judgment and issued orders to his celestial servants. Michael, the prince of the heavenly host, received the devastating command, "Go down and destroy the giants." And Michael descended, not as a mere flame, but as a living storm, a terrifying whirlwind of light and unimaginable power. Behind him came Raphael, Gabriel, and Uriel, followed by countless legions of angels, their swords flashing like bolts of lightning. The heavenly court had convened, and the decree of judgment was final. The heavens fell silent as the Most High's sentence echoed through the celestial realms. Not only the Watchers, the fallen angels, would be punished, but also their wives, the women who had joined in their rebellion and given birth to the monstrous Nephilim. These women were not victims, they were willing accomplices. They were daughters of the earth who had coveted the fleeting glory of the heavens. They drank deeply of forbidden knowledge and, in doing so, became mothers of giants, queens of empires built on destruction. While the Nephilim ruled with ruthless brutality, these women reveled in their ill-gotten power, worshipped as goddesses, revered as the bearers of the angels' strength. But the time for mercy had come to a definitive end. The Creator, in his infinite justice, spoke to the heavenly armies. Michael, commander of the hosts of heaven, bind the Watchers, judge the women, and purify the earth. And Michael descended once more, surrounded by legions of light. The mountains themselves trembled at his touch. The Watchers were bound beneath the eternal rocks, sealed away in darkness, imprisoned for eternity. But for the women, those who had willingly participated in the sins of the heavens, the punishment would be different and far more terrible. The beauty that had once made them so desirable was stripped away, leaving behind a hollow shell. The glory that had once captivated the angels was extinguished, replaced by an all-consuming darkness. Their faces lost their radiance, becoming grotesque masks of their former selves. Their voices were transformed into mournful wails, and their tears became the source of the abyssal waters. They were transformed into mermaids, creatures forever trapped between two worlds, neither fully human nor fully celestial. Their bodies became monstrous hybrids, half woman, half shadow. And their voices, now cursed, would echo eternally over the waves, luring unsuspecting men to the same fate of perdition they had so readily chosen. And so, the Watchers' wives became the daughters of the abyss, forever symbols of temptation and the terrible consequences of sin. But Michael's mission was not yet complete. There was something else, a deeper corruption that festered upon the earth. The Nephilim, the giants, the unholy offspring of angels and women. They ruled the world with ungodly strength, devouring the flesh of men and drinking the blood of the innocent. Their cities were temples of cruelty, and their thrones were altars of pain. Then Michael approached silently and whispered invisible words among them, planting seeds of doubt and distrust. A divine breath spread the poison of division among the giants, and what had once been a united army became a breeding ground for treason. Brothers began to turn against each other, each accusing the other of seeking the favor of the fallen angels. Envy grew like an inferno, and the giants' pride twisted into utter madness. And so, the war between the Nephilim began in earnest. The earth shook with their earth-shattering footsteps, and the deafening sound of their battles echoed through the valleys. The mountains split open under the immense weight of their falling bodies, and the giants' blood flowed like rivers, drowning the once fertile plains. They, born of forbidden union, destroyed themselves with their own hands. Michael watched from above, impassive. His mission required no sword, only the unwavering application of divine justice. For the pride of the Nephilim would ultimately be their downfall, and God's judgment would be fulfilled through their own self-inflicted corruption. When the last giant finally fell, the winds ceased their howling, the seas fell silent, and the mournful voices of the Watchers' wives, now sirens, wailed among the waves, singing dirges for their dead children, weeping for a glory that they would never reclaim. Then Michael raised his sword, its blade shimmering with celestial light. The firmament rent with a blinding flash, and the voice of God echoed once more. Corruption has been purged from the earth. The time of judgment has begun. The sky fell silent once more, and the earth awaited its fate with a mixture of dread and anticipation. The Watchers, captured and utterly defeated, were chained by Michael and cast into caverns of eternal darkness, prisons of stone and fire where they would await the final day of judgment. The world was silent for a moment, but the air remained heavy, thick with an unspoken tension. The waters, which had been carefully guarded since the dawn of creation, began to turn with a restless energy. Noah looked up at the sky, his gaze unwavering. The wind had shifted direction, carrying with it a sense of foreboding. The birds had ceased their cheerful songs, replaced by an unsettling silence. And for the first time, thunder rumbled in the distance, but without the accompanying flash of lightning. It was the harbinger, the unmistakable sign. The countdown to judgment had begun. The time for mercy was rapidly running out, and the faint, distant sound of rain, still invisible to the naked eye, could already be heard in the hallowed halls of heaven. Noah continued his tireless work. Day after day, he hammered away under the scorching sun, enduring the relentless mockery and scorn of the villagers. The ark grew steadily before the eyes of the world, a massive wooden fortress erected in the middle of a parched plain, a sanctuary for the living amidst approaching death. 3 stories high, with countless compartments, it stood as a testament to faith and obedience. And like a silent, inexplicable mystery, the animals began to arrive. They came from every corner of the earth, guided not by familiar trails or visible paths, but by an invisible instinct, as if obeying an ancient, primordial call. Lions walked calmly side by side with lambs, their natural animosity forgotten. Serpents coiled silently, their venom harmless. Eagles perched peacefully beside doves, symbols of war and peace united in a common purpose. And the impossible became reality before the very eyes of men. But even this extraordinary sight failed to sway the hearts of men. They refused to believe. The mocking laughter still echoed through the villages, growing louder and more derisive. The decadent feasts did not cease. On the contrary, they increased in frequency and extravagance. Orgies multiplied like a plague, spreading unchecked through the land. God's holy name was blasphemed in the public squares and taverns, his warnings ignored. While Noah preached, he hammered, his muscles aching, his spirit unwavering. And while he hammered, he wept, his tears mingling with the sweat that poured down his face. "Repent," he cried out. "There is still time." But the only answer he received was the raucous laughter of the wicked, their hearts hardened beyond redemption. Women danced wildly around roaring bonfires, their movements lewd and provocative, and men sang songs of praise to the Nephilim, their false gods of stone and flesh. Even so, the signs continued to appear, growing more ominous with each passing day. The moon turned a blood red, its surface resembling congealed blood. Wild animals fled the forests in droves, as if sensing the impending end of creation. The winds blew simultaneously from east and west, howling like disembodied voices of lamentation. Light rain fell upon forgotten deserts, a sign of both judgment and potential renewal. The ground trembled beneath the feet of the arrogant and unrepentant, but the human heart remained stubbornly hardened. Even in the face of undeniable omens, man continued to mock the unseen, clinging to his ignorance. And then the 7th day arrived. The ark was finally complete, immobile and imposing, like a massive altar erected before the very face of destiny. God spoke one last time, his voice resonating with both power and sorrow. "Come, you and all your household, into the ark, for I have found you to be a righteous man in this generation." Noah didn't answer with words. He simply looked at the horizon, his eyes searching, and the horizon seemed to look back, expectant and heavy with meaning. He gathered his family together, his heart filled with a mixture of hope and trepidation. One by one, they entered the great vessel without fanfare, without goodbyes, their faces etched with solemn determination. The quiet obedience of the righteous stood in stark contrast to the raucous noise of the mocking crowd. "Coward," they shouted, "come celebrate with us. Enjoy your last moments of freedom." Noah simply closed his eyes, his soul weary, and a single tear escaped, falling onto the wood he himself had anointed with his own tears and unwavering faith. And then the supernatural occurred, defying all earthly explanation. The massive ark door moved on its own, slowly and solemnly, as if moved by the very will of heaven itself. A muffled roar echoed through the valley, sending shivers down the spines of those who witnessed it. The birds ceased their flight, falling silent in the face of the inexplicable. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath, as if in reverence. Noah remained silent inside the ark, his heart pounding in his chest. The sound of the creaking wood was the only evidence that the weather was about to change, that the world was on the precipice of an unimaginable catastrophe. Outside, the laughter subsided, replaced by an uneasy silence. Fear began to dawn in the eyes of the mockers, their bravado fading in the face of the unknown. "Where is the prophet's flood?" they whispered, their voices laced with a growing apprehension. But the sky no longer offered any comfort. The first drop of rain fell, a heavy, solitary drop that struck the dust of the parched earth and dissolved like a divine tear, a symbol of both sorrow and impending judgment. Then another drop fell, and another and another. The laughter ceased completely, replaced by nervous whispers and fearful glances. Children ran to their mothers, seeking comfort and protection. Men looked up in astonishment, their faces etched with the dawning horror. The wind roared, picking up speed and intensity. The clouds twisted and contorted, forming colossal eyes of vapor and lightning, their gaze fixed upon the earth below. And then the firmament tore open, revealing the full fury of divine judgment. The floodgates of heaven opened wide, and what descended was not mere rain. It was judgment itself, a cataclysmic deluge unlike anything the world had ever seen. The water fell furiously, dense and alive, as if it possessed a consciousness of its own. Lightning slashed across the veil of the sky like spears hurled by warring angels, illuminating the terror below. The ground shook violently, and geysers of water erupted from the earth itself, opening deep wounds in the soil. Creation, once perfect in its design, began to crumble before the very eyes of its creator. Inside the ark, Noah prayed, his voice a mere whisper lost amidst the deafening roaring of the waves. The animals howled, roared, and banged against the walls of their enclosures, overcome by primordial fear. But the ark held firm, sustained by a strength that was not of this world, a testament to unwavering faith. The drops of rain became waves, each one larger and more powerful than the last. The waves merged into seas, and the seas rose to swallow the world whole. The familiar paths disappeared beneath the rising waters. The houses dissolved, their foundations crumbling. The cities were wiped off the map as if they had never existed. Outside, utter panic reigned. Those who had mocked and scorned now cried out in desperation, Noah, "Open the door. Let us in. Forgive us. Now we believe." But the door had been sealed shut by the hand of God himself. No human force, no matter how great, could break it open. It was too late for pleas or bargains. Faith cannot be born of fear. It must be born of genuine repentance. And the time for repentance had long since passed. The waters rose with relentless speed, engulfing everything in their path. What had once been solid ground, the foundation of civilization, now became a terrifying abyss, a watery grave. Thousand-year-old trees fell like fragile branches before the overwhelming force of judgment, their roots ripped from the earth. Towers erected in homage to the Nephilim, monuments to pride and arrogance, crumbled like sand before the wind of divine wrath. Mountains, once proud and majestic, began to disappear beneath the relentless veil of water. The screams of men mingled with the deafening roar of the flood, creating a symphony of despair, thunder, and unrelenting judgment. The few remaining giants, once feared as gods, tried in vain to resist the inevitable. With brutal blows, they lifted massive rocks, defying the waves, roaring against the sky in futile defiance. But the force that descended upon them was not just water, it was justice itself. One of them, overcome by the madness of pride, cried out in a thunderous voice, "We are eternal. We cannot be destroyed." And then a liquid wall engulfed him, forever silencing the arrogance of those who believed themselves immortal. The altars of the Watchers were ripped from the ground, their foundations shattered. The statues of false gods toppled and were swept away by the raging torrent. The profane inscriptions, filled with corrupted knowledge, sorcery, and lust, disappeared beneath the crushing weight of the abyss. The entire earth seemed to weep as it was washed clean with tears and rage, cleansed by the divine flood. God's justice, ignored and rejected for generations, now descended like an unstoppable avalanche, crushing all that stood in its path. What had once been mockery was now a scream of terror. What had been pride was now utter, paralyzing fear. Inside the ark, Noah embraced his wife, seeking solace and strength in her presence. Ham held Japheth's shoulders tightly, trying to contain the fear that trembled in his hands. Shem, looking up at the ceiling that creaked ominously under the strain of the storm, muttered, "Father, God has kept his word." "Yes," Noah replied, his voice heavy with sorrow, "but my heart aches for them." Outside, the sound was deafening, a constant barrage of water, wind, and screams. For 40 long days and 40 even longer nights, the waters did not cease their relentless assault. Each dawn was darker and more ominous than the last, casting a pall over the ravaged world. Each thunderclap sounded like the roar of celestial beasts unleashed in their fury. Lightnings flashed across the sky like swords in an invisible war, a battle between good and evil, creation and destruction. The living earth now mourned its own corruption, its surface scarred and unrecognizable. There were no more cities, no more music, no more decadent feasts. The Watchers were chained in the abyss of darkness, their power extinguished. The Nephilim lay in the depths of the sea, their monstrous forms nightmares drowned beneath the chaos. Humanity had been reduced to a single family, a small remnant surrounded by wood, faith, and unwavering hope. The waters rose above the highest mountains, engulfing everything in their path. Ararat, Sinai, all the peaks of the world were swallowed by the relentless deluge. And then, finally, the world fell silent. There were no more screams of terror, no more sounds of war. Only the sound of the wind, the rain, and the ark floating aimlessly in the middle of nowhere, a lone vessel in a vast, watery expanse. Inside the ark, days blended seamlessly into nights, marked only by the changing light. Time dissolved in the incessant sway of the waves, losing all meaning. The sounds of the animals filled the interior, creating a living chorus within a floating tune, a symphony of survival. On the surface of the waters floated debris from a lost civilization, driftwood, torn clothing, the ruins of temples and cities, all testaments to human folly. It was the cemetery of the old world, a somber reminder of what had been lost. What had once been dominion was now a fading memory, a ghost of the past. Human pride had sunk too deep, too heavy to be saved. But God had not forgotten his promise. Above the swirling clouds, the light still shone, a beacon of hope in the darkness. The angels watched over the ark with silent reverence, their hearts filled with compassion. For what survived within it was not just flesh and blood, it was the future itself, the seed of humanity, the echo of grace. Gradually, imperceptibly, the fury of the storm began to subside. The rain lost its violent intensity, becoming a gentler, more mournful drizzle. The thunder receded into the distance, like a vanquished beast retreating to its lair. The clouds parted, revealing a golden slash in the sky, a promise of hope. A single ray of sunlight broke through the mist, illuminating the desolate landscape. It was the first ray of sunlight in many days, a poignant reminder that life still existed, that renewal was possible. The ark floated solemnly, alone, like a silent witness between two worlds, the old and the new. The old world had been judged and found wanting. The new world was still being born, slowly and painstakingly. And for a time, the earth waited, holding its breath in anticipation. The sun returned timidly, casting its light over a silent and devastated world. The ark rocked gently on the waters that still covered the entire earth, a lonely vessel in a sea of destruction. Noah kept faith, trusting in God's promise, as the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months. The wind brought a new scent, not of death and decay, but of promise and potential. Then Noah released a raven, followed by a dove, testing the waters. And when the dove returned, bearing an olive branch in its beak, a vibrant symbol of hope blossomed within that silent ark, filling the hearts of its inhabitants with renewed optimism. Reverently, Noah knelt down, his calloused hands lifted in prayer, and he gave thanks to the God who judges, but also renews, who punishes, but also redeems. The waters gradually receded, revealing the contours of the land. The mountains reappeared, their peaks rising majestically from the watery depths. The ark rested gently on Mount Ararat, as if it had found its final resting place, like a weary heart finally finding peace after a long and arduous storm. Then God spoke, his voice filled with compassion and renewed promise. "Come out of the ark, you and your family. Multiply and fill the earth again." The massive door of the ark swung open, allowing light to flood into the once darkened interior. The animals emerged, free at last, their movements hesitant at first, then filled with joy and energy. They walked upon the mud that would soon give rise to new life, a new beginning for creation. And Noah, with slow and deliberate steps, stepped onto the ground, his bare feet sinking into the soft earth. The same ground that had been judged and cleansed now received his blessing, his gratitude, and his unwavering devotion. He built an altar, the first altar of a new world, a symbol of reconciliation and renewed covenant. And there, in the profound silence of the new dawn, he offered a sacrifice to the God who judges, but also renews, who destroys, but also recreates. The aroma of the offering rose to the heavens, a fragrant symbol of repentance and gratitude. And God spoke once more, his voice echoing through the valleys, "Never again will I destroy all flesh by the waters of a flood." As long as the earth exists, there will be seed time and harvest, cold and heat, day and night. My promise is eternal. And then the seal of the covenant appeared in the sky, a magnificent arc of colors crossing the heavens, a rainbow, an eternal reminder that justice may wound, but mercy always heals. It was a pact between heaven and earth, a promise of forgiveness and renewal. The earth, though wounded and scarred, flourished once more. Green shoots appeared between the whetstones, pushing their way towards the sunlight. Birds sang their joyous melodies, celebrating the rebirth of creation. Rivers carved new paths through the landscape, shaping the new world. Life silently began again, slowly but surely reclaiming its dominion. The cold nights brought with them stories of hope and resilience, tales of survival and faith. Noah's sons worked tirelessly, tilling the soil and planting seeds. Their wives gathered roots and herbs, nurturing the land. And the flame of the hearth burned brightly once more, a symbol of hope and domesticity. Noah knew that evil still resided in the heart of man, that the potential for corruption remained. But he also knew that God's love was infinitely greater, that his mercy endures forever. The ancient world of giants and rebellious angels had been buried beneath the waters, a testament to the consequences of sin. And a new world, more humble and pure, was born beneath the arch of promise, a beacon of hope for generations to come. Because the flood was not just destruction, it was also rebirth, a cleansing of the old to make way for the new. And the ark, more than just a refuge from the storm, was the womb of humanity, the vessel of hope that carried the seed of a new beginning. The earth was purified, cleansed of its corruption. But the heart of man still needed to be transformed, to be renewed by faith and love.